Okay. When I first started turning wood, I soon found out about the most important thing besides learning how to use your tools, how to sharpen them. And I do a lot of demonstrations at various events during the year, and I get asked a lot of questions. Well, who sharpens your tools? I said, well, if you're ever working with a piece of oak, you better know how, because you're going to be resharpening them about every 10 minutes or so. And there's so many different systems out there. This is probably the most affordable. I think it's made by One Way. It's called the Wolverine system. I think they're pricing a little over $100 now. There is some setup to it, and when you get it, I have a lot of fun. I also belong to a camera club, and I keep asking everybody, how many's read the instructions lately? Nobody reads the instructions. Well, it helps if you do here, because this is really set up for an 8-inch grinder. And in the instructions, they will suggest that you raise your 8-inch grinder about a ½ inch up, so that it's on the grinding plane of your jig. You want to be a little bit above center of the wheel, and that sets that position. So I got busy, and I've got a full woodworking shop, routers and all that, so I made the base for it and got it all set up, and then I thought, now what? So you position your brackets here as per specs, and it's a real solid system. It works great. I think the most important thing whenever you're using it is to get your tool spacing on your jig here the same every time. That way, when you go back to resharpen the tool, you'll have the same angle on your tool. They suggested drilling a hole in a block of wood, and it can be 1.5 inches deep, it can be 2.5 inches deep. It's whatever you want to make it. But when you do, be sure to put either a penny or a dime in the end of it, because your tool otherwise is hitting raw wood, and if you keep jamming it in there, it's going to get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's what I did here. You can sharpen about all your turning tools, including your bowl gouges with your swept back design. You can sharpen scrapers, skews, just about every grinding tool I think you got. One thing I have found out with playing and kind of experimenting, your carbide tools that use the inserts, you can take a diamond home, and you can sharpen the edges of them. And I also do metal turning, and I sharpen a lot of my high-speed steel cutters and my carbide cutters with a diamond hone. You got to watch your angles. This angle here is set up. It depends on what angle you're using on your tools. It seems like woodturners they've all got a different idea for the right angle, the exact angle for their tool. The Ellsworth grind specifies 60 degrees. One of the where'd it go? Here it is. Probably one of the cheapest angle gauges I found. You can find these Lowe's and Menards. They're about $6, and you can just take it, and if you want to know what the angle is, bring it up here, slide it down, and okay, according to this, I'm running 50 degrees on these. But this is, some people like a tool more aggressive. Myself, I'm kind of on the laid-back side, so my spindle gouges, I've been experimenting actually the last few days with them. And the angles on these are kind of varying. this one is about 40, and I think I'm going to probably go to about 55 or 60. That's just what works best for me. And somebody will come up I'll be at the Apple Pork Festival or some of these, festivals, and somebody said, what angle do you use on your spindle gouge? And I said, well, not to be a smart aleck, but it's the tool, or it's the angle that works for you. Now, if you're a new turner, stick to the basics. But then after a while, you might want that tool to be more aggressive, or maybe it's not doing what you want it to. Well, experiment. The worst scenario is you might have to regrind the tool. On a spindle gouge, this one here is one grind a lot of people will use. What did I use the other? Oh, it's in here. And the newer, I think, isn't the newer one-way?
Variegated?
Yeah, doesn't have that metal tang in there, does it?
That's right.
Correct.
Get rid of that thing.
No way.
No.
No way. You touch that, I'll threaten you live. That is what centers this.
I
Now,
prefer the
Wheel.
new version.
yeah, some people do, and that's okay. That's that's why they make variations. It's whatever works for you. Myself, I like it because whenever I stick it in here and I screw this nothing more than a bolt down on it, it's got a flat piece of metal between here, and it centers it. My Tormac system just has the flat bolt, and there's a lot of times I've stuck something in there and it has been cocked. It didn't center like it was supposed to. If you put it in here, it will center. And I've heard the pros and the cons. I've heard some turners say they like this system, and as you say, you don't, and that's why they make the variations. But if I was going to sharpen this spindle gouge, first thing I would do would be stick it in here and kind of tighten it down a little bit. Take my gauging block, slide this up there to it. Now this is normally screwed to the underside of my bench. This is the first time it's been off the bench in probably 15 years. But basically, you just push the tool down against it and tighten it up. Now, the first thing you don't want to do is just go over here and stick it in your grinder and turn the grinder on, because you don't know if that angle is right or not. So, I'm looking at that Sharpie that was around here a while ago, I forgot. But you take a Sharpie and you color that. And then when you get ready to check.
Back here on the table.
This is your best friend. But before you turn your grinder on, just take that and spin the wheel and put the tool up there against it and see where the grinder is hitting it. That's the easiest way to save a lot of problems. Now, I've already got this set, so I could fire the grinder up and it would more than likely. This is a 2-speed grinder, 1725 or 3450. I prefer the slower speed. If you blew high-speed steel, you don't lose the temper in it like you do with carbon steel. But I'll still check like that, and I've got a bright mark from the tip all the way down. And you just basically start on one side, rotate it over, light pressure. When you see the sparks coming over the edge of the tool, you know that you've taken enough off. And it's very light pressure. If your grinding wheels are wobbling, a lot of times that could be in the washers. I've got my left wheel here is wobbling, and the washers that clamp up against your wheel a lot of times are not flat. And I'm thinking about taking these washers off and since I've got the option, I do have a small mill, or I can stick it in my lathe. I'm going to true them up, and then I'm going to put them back on again. And this thing's wobbled for 10 years, so I'm not going to worry about it. But that is about how long it takes to sharpen one of these tools. And I'm surprised somebody hasn't asked already, what about the burr? Don't worry about it. First time you stick it on the lathe, and first time you make a cut, it's gone. I don't hone. I've tried honing, and I'm not a fan of it. I think it's a waste of time, because I've honed these edges, and I've compared how long the sharp edge held, or how long it held that real sharp edge that you spent. You got to get it razor sharp. If you're doing anything of any size, just go sharpen it and start using the tool, because it doesn't really improve the cut that much. Now, if I'm demonstrating, let me say on a weekend event somewhere, I'm not close to a grinder, I'll take a diamond hone, one of those little diamond card hones. I wear them things out about every 3 or 4 months, and you just take it across here. Well, when you grind this with an 8-inch grinder, when you sharpen that with a flat diamond hone, it's only going to touch the sharp point here, and it's going to touch back here on the heel of it, because your grinder is making a concave grind. And there's a lot of times that I probably won't touch these things up for quite some time. But there's basically 2 kinds of grinds here. I'm going to pass these around now. I'm going to, but that's just one of your bowl gouges grinds that you can use. I mean, just like in or spindle gouges rather. Now in bowl gouges, before they came up with the swept back design like we're using here, they were almost squared around like this. That's how I started turning a bowl years ago. And actually the bowl gouge is a invention of the I don't know what it is, 1930s, 1940s. It's an invention anyway that isn't very that old. Some of these grinds are called the Irish grind and various things. Okay, but again, the angle on this is set pretty well to this, I think the same. I don't know if this would match up or not, but if I were going to say use this, it would be the same thing. You'd sit here and kind of, I don't know what we'd do without magic markers or Sharpies, and then crank this thing up so this will slide through. You always need about 3 hands to do it. Run at the end here. Get your length. I say that can be 1 inch long, it can be 1.5 inches long, it's whatever you want to do. Just the whole idea is to be able to return to that measurement every time.
The generation coming up now never heard of magic markers.
Yeah. There's a lot of things they haven't heard of.
I check on them to see how to use the computer.
But, okay, now, I'm hitting on what I call the heel of the tool. I've got to change the angle. To change the angle, you unclamp this over here, and I know that if I'm hitting back here, I need to slide this back. And as one person said, I was talking to earlier tonight, he says, be sure that's tight, because it gets real exciting. But if it's kind of a trial and error, but if you just spin that wheel and do that, and then another way you can do this is sight down the side of your gouge and see it, pull that out until it looks about right. and that's where it should be. So you can, again, you want to check that. I'm glad in my shop I don't have that much room. I've got a compact shop. Again, I'm not using a whole lot of pressure on this. I'm going to stop right there, pass this around. You can see how inconsistent I was the last time I ground this. But a few more passes and this would have been cleaned up. If you've got a roughing gouge, okay, this tool rest over here is set at an angle. As I say, anybody messes with it, you're going to mess with me. The reason why it's set up so that I can sharpen my skews. And when I sharpen the skew, I set it flat on the tool rest, and that gives me the exact angle I need. And all my skews are sharpened at this angle. It's the one I like. I mean, again, what angle is it? Well, I don't know. I doubt that would even work. It's probably close to about a 20-degree angle, something like that. Usually, your rule of thumb, this is like a 3/8 thickness. You want the grind here to be about 1.5 times as long as the thickness of your tool. That's kind of a rule of thumb. This one is not exactly right. It's not that way, but it cuts. Again, now here, since I've not messed with this tool rest, I know it's the right angle. When you've got a curved skew, you basically use your thumb for a pivot point, and you just pivot the tool. Turn it over. I always start with the point and go to the heel, and I'll go the other way. And to touch this up, now this will be on the finer wheel. On that one. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I'm vibrating here. But and again, if you look at this skew, you're going to notice that one side's a little sharpened a little flatter than the other side. I don't notice any difference the way it turns a bead or anything. I like to have it the same way, but I'm not going to take the time and correct it. It's cutting the way it is right now, so why mess with it? But if you'll look at this tool real close, you're always looking at the edge, the point or the part where you're making it sharp. If you can see a shiny spot on there, it's not sharp. And if you can't see any shiny spots on it, then you've got a real good edge on it. And if you look at that, that's not totally sharpened. because you see there's a little bit of the marker left on part of that, and also if you look at the edge on one side, you'll see a shiny spot. And but as you can see, it takes just 5 minutes to make an edge. Okay, say if you want to sharpen this, I will use it on the tool rest. I won't mess, you know, with the angle or anything. There's an edge up here I can rest the tool on. There's enough there that I can, and what you're going to do is just rotate it. And that's the best way you can get, or the way I found that I can get the most consistent grind. And that you've got to, by doing this by hand, you've got, it also takes a certain amount of, you know, practice. And but you can just come up here and you can just roll it. I don't know, it's been a while since I've sharpened this one. It might get interesting here. Yeah, I can tell I'm out of practice on this one. I think this is probably the most difficult one, really, to sharpen. The great thing about it is it's not finicky about the angles. But getting there. But it's a great roughing tool. Say you got something square or something out or round or anything like that. It's a great tool for the lathe. It's great for making square things round or crazy things. But you've got to learn how to roll the edge. I say I'm not really that good, because I'm going to hand that around. You can see that there's variation in that too. And the point I want to get across here is that it takes practice. And it may take me 4 or 5 more passes before I'll get that right. I don't like to see a faceted tool. I like to see a consistent grind all the way around. And it's just one of those things that say the more you do it, the better you get at it. I don't sharpen that tool very often, so that's why I'm not very good at it. Okay, how many's got a parting tool with a spear point? Okay, how do you sharpen it? Basically, you just find this angle, put it up against the grinding wheel at that angle, and just press it up against the grinding wheel. Best thing to do is take the Sharpie and put your marks on there to make sure you're getting consistent. Yeah, you'd like to get the same amount off of both sides, but you know, variation is not going to hurt anything. The main thing is it sharp? That's all there is really for sharpening them. If you have a scraper, again, I just lay the scraper on top of this tool rest right where it's at. There's enough support there, and to sharpen a scraper, the angle they say should be around 15 degrees, but it's not critical. I don't know what I've got on this one. Well, about 20 degrees. This is the safest tool that you can use in wood turning. And this is the point I always make when I'm out in the public. If you want to learn how to turn wood and you want to go home and start making shavings tonight, grab your scraper. And contrary to what the name says, scraper, if you have a round nose scraper that's nice and sharp. I was demonstrating outside one day down in Collinsville, I think, and I was had my little mini lathe out there, and it had just a light breeze that day. And I don't know what I was doing, but I was making some very fine cuts with a scraper. And I had wood shavings floating through the air like spider webs. So, and it still does not leave as clean a finish, or as good a finish, as your spindle gouges or anything that cuts wood, because this does scrape wood. But if you get a nice burr up here on the end of that, fresh burr, like if you've got some end grain in your bowl that's giving you fits, go grind your scraper, make it nice and sharp, go in there and make a real light cut. It may not get rid of all of it, but it'll get rid of a lot of it. And this particular tool has been around for hundreds of years. The basic tools that the woodturners use for hundreds of years would be your spindle gouges, your scrapers, and your skew. If you're sharpening the skew, you want to sharpen that surface and that surface. But the other two surfaces most people forget about is this one and this one. And the most important part of the skew is that sharp point on the heel and the toe, because that's what really does most of your cutting. When you go to I had a skew. I do it.
I think it's floating around right now.
Is yeah.
Or it's going out the door.
I'll catch up with him. But anyway, the curved skew has a curvature here, and actually you can use it flat on the tool rest. And you can use the corner of it, you can use this end of it, or you can use the center of it. But as long as you're rubbing the bevel. And about the average person that picks up the skew, about the only thing they want to use it for is flat on the tool rest and use it for a scraper. Because if you look, you've got a sharpened angle here and you got an angle here. And that is also called a negative rake scraper. And it works real good on problem end grain and stuff like that. I use my curved skew, again, on the inside of the bowl as a negative rake scraper, because a lot of times it'll smooth out that end grain that we keep fighting all the time. Yeah, there. And it's kind of hard to see the difference on this one. I didn't bring my big one. The big one I have is about 1.25 inches across, and you can definitely see the curvature on it. I call it my equalizer. I can take a 3-inch square piece of wood 1 foot long and have it round in probably no more than 5 minutes, because it can be a very aggressive tool. It's a great tool for finish. How many has a parting tool, something similar to this? Does it come down to a straight point?
One of them does.
This one doesn't. And I found out the straight point, when you're parting off with it, it just rips the heck out of cross grain, end grain. It makes a real rough finish. And so I got playing around with this one day, and the top curvature of this is bringing the tool in and upside down on the 8-inch wheel. That's what gives me this curvature here. Well, you've got more of a cutting action because your chips and everything else are coming up in a plane like this. Well, then I got to thinking, well, I'm going to kind of back cut down here too, and that might give me a little something to rub against the bevel, you might say. It's worked great. I don't have near the torn grain that you normally get with a spear point type of, well, and this one too is also a good one for making a lot of torn grain. It gets the job done, but it does it pretty crude. And yeah, I'll run things. What tools haven't I covered? In the sharpening, I think we've got about everything. Got any questions, or? And how do I know? It's The type of spark that you get off of your tool will tell you whether it's high-speed steel or whether it's carbon steel. And usually carbon steel, when the spark comes off, I believe, comes off of a grinding wheel, it'll act like a spark or a fireworks. It'll kind of burst out into a bunch of little points, you might say. High-speed steel usually is just a straight spark. And a lot of your blacksmiths and different people that work with steel a lot of times that's how they will find out if it's what it is. Okay. If there are no questions, I thank you for the evening here. And hope you